guests who are the heroes of our planet. And today I have a special guest who is a New York-based director of sales at Greenplaces and the author of Attainable Sustainability, Building Your Corporate Climate Strategy. I'm going to let him introduce himself.
No one's ever called me a hero of the planet before, but I'm thinking of making a business card. I really like that. Hi, Oina. It's very good to be here. I'm very excited. You got the bio right. I work at Greenplaces. We're a carbon accounting software company that helps mid-market companies comply with climate regulation, mostly around measuring emissions and building reduction strategies and figuring out science-based targets and carbon offsets. And as part of that, I wrote a book called Attainable Sustainability that I think is funny and interesting and hopefully very not boring. People seem to like it. But it's also about how to build a climate strategy that is profitable and good for your business, because it always has to be, otherwise it'll go away very quickly, but also very impactful for the climate, which a lot of people seem to forget about when they just talk about regulations and compliance and moving paper around. They forget why we're doing all this, and it's for the climate. And so the book's about those two pieces.
So, is it actually attainable? Can you be climate positive and, money positive at the same time?
I think if you're actually doing climate strategy in the right way, it's almost impossible to not have both of those things. And I'll give you a very simple example. Most companies come to begin their corporate sustainability work because some of their largest clients are asking them to.
Right.
So if you sell, or investors. So if you're selling to Microsoft or Salesforce, or if you're in the banking industry selling to UBS, and you make $1 million a year from them, and they have these giant net zero goals that are very public, and by 2050 they want to be a net zero business, whatever, and they're going to all their vendors and saying, we need you to build out a climate strategy. We need you to tell us your carbon emissions, to tell us how you're going to reduce them, to tell us how you're switching to renewable energy, or you lose $1 million in business from us. Well, all of a sudden, building a climate strategy is very good for business because you don't want to lose $1 million. And it's very good for the planet because you will all of a sudden start understanding how to reduce your emissions, moving to renewable energy. You'll begin thinking thoughtfully about carbon offset projects. So I think if you're doing it right, it's impossible to not have it both be a profitable effort as well as an impactful and a positive.
So, if I understand this correctly, doing it wrong is doing it by a mandate from someone else. But doing it right is actually just like making it the core of your business, as in like, let's make sure we're actually not killing our planet.
I would say it's a little differently. So I think the reason you do it is entirely up to you. If you want to start your sustainability strategy because there's a law that makes you do that, or a customer is making you do that, and you want to grumble and be upset about it and like hate that people are distracting you from your core business, but you're still going to do a really good job measuring your emissions, building reduction strategies, setting targets, and you're just going to be annoyed by that, I'm fine with it. I think that's a very acceptable reason. I think everyone can come to this in their own path. There's going to be some like Microsoft or Salesforce that have visionary leaders who really build this into every part of their business, who spend a ton of money, time, care about it. There's going to be bankers like JP Morgan who spend $200 million buying carbon removal projects. That's incredible. There's also going to be companies that do this a little more begrudgingly, that just say, I guess I got to do it. Like CSRD or the SEC or, goddamn California is making me do this, or my big clients are making me do this. Okay, now that I know I have to do this, and now that I know what this even is, how do I do a good job at it? Because we're the kind of company that doesn't do bad jobs at anything. So doing it right is just doing a very, very good job at measuring emissions and reducing them. Why you do that doesn't bother me at all.
Okay, so let's take an example of a company that, does not have any legal obligation to do it. What would be a good first step that they can take to like jumpstart this journey?
So the first step for any company should be measuring your carbon emissions. And your carbon emissions, there's a bunch of fancy rules around the world about how to measure them. They're all organized by something called the GHG protocol. What it basically means is you're going to measure the impact of your business on the planet. There's 3 categories of emissions called Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. which is just this way of agreeing. It's very difficult to understand what is the impact of driving a mile versus flying a mile, for spending $1 on meat, for spending $1 on a smoothie. Like all these things make some sort of impact, but how do you measure them? So the GHG protocol came out with scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Scope 1 is called your fugitive emissions. It's like anything you burn. So if you own vehicles or own planes or own refrigerators, or you're a restaurant who owns stoves, that's scope 1. Scope 2 is called purchase electricity. So it's spending money on energy for your offices, for your restaurants, for your stores, whatever. And then scope 3 is everything else in your business. So it's basically your supply chain. It's your business travel, your waste, all the stuff you spend money on, so, your investments, all that stuff goes into scope 3. So for a business that's doing this not for compliance, or I guess regardless of why you're doing this, compliance or just marketing strategy or because you care about this, measuring your emissions, understanding what is my impact on the planet today is where you start. Because once you know that number and you know how it breaks down, well, then you can say, well, where do I want to focus? Like, what's my biggest issue here? What's out of whack? Is my energy grid really dirty? Well, let me focus on switching to renewable energy. If I look at my suppliers, do I see that some suppliers are so much worse off than others? Well, let me try to get those suppliers to really improve. Do I see that I'm traveling really inefficiently? And what's cool about that is I can say, well, let me try to reduce my travel emissions, not necessarily by traveling less all the time. Travel is really good for business. You should travel. That'll help you close deals. That'll help build the culture. But can you travel more efficiently? Can you travel fewer times a year, but get people together in bigger groups? Can you pick the cities you travel into so that people fly shorter routes, which will also save you money? Can you create a policy like Meta has that says if you can get somewhere in 4 hours by train or by car, you're not allowed to fly, which is also often cheaper than flying. So if you create all these things, you will begin to develop the strategy that reduces your emissions, which will be great, and also very often saves you money on a lot of this work.
Let's maybe take an example of like super emitters, right? The ones that are actually like burning a lot of fossil fuel and stuff like that. As far as we know now at Orbify, they have to do a combination of actual like emission reduction in terms of just like making sure they burn less fossil fuel. They have some advanced filters to capture the emissions, and then the offsets. Is there like a rule of thumb in all of this? Like you should be, for example, reducing your emissions by 60%. By doing it like in-house, quote unquote, and then the rest you can actually buy in carbon credits. Is there a rule of thumb in this?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, there is no rule of thumb. People have different philosophies. Some people say you should first reduce everything you can reduce and then buy offsets at the very end when you're really stuck. Other people say that you should buy offsets at the very beginning and use that as like a tax, a carbon tax on your own company that incentivizes you to reduce your emissions. Because now, if you reduce your emissions a little bit, you buy fewer offsets, which is great. You spend less money. I am in the second camp. And one of the main reasons I'm in that camp of buy offsets for your entire footprint immediately and then focus on reducing that footprint is because if you're spending money on an offset today, and it's a good high quality offset, there's a lot of junk offsets, there's a lot of garbage out there, happy to talk, but if you're spending money on a good high quality offset today, that is making an impact today. And when we talk about carbon removal or carbon reductions, that grows algorithmically. Like an impact today is worth 20 times that in 20 years. But if you instead focus on reducing for 20 years and then only buy your offset later on, that offset won't be as impactful. So I think companies should offset everything immediately or everything they can. It can be expensive, so you should always think about budget and make sure this is all reasonable for you. And while you're doing that, you should use that as an incentive to reduce. Does that make sense? Do you guys think differently?
I think it's tricky, to be honest, because I don't have a very deep background when it comes to, net zero strategies and all this. We primarily work with nature-based solutions, and I know it's a tricky area. So like you were saying, there are some garbage projects, there are some really good projects, but to this day, it's very hard to distinguish between all of them. And I think a lot of buyers get into this trap. But also, if we can just take a step back, because I know there are two parts of this entire like carbon credit market. There is this carbon trading, so basically where you can buy credits from somebody else from the exchange, and there is this whole VCM, voluntary carbon market. In your experience, where does the magic happen? Is it on the trading side or is it on the VCM?
Well, most companies are going to be playing on the VCM side.
Mm-hmm.
Most companies are going to be buying these carbon credits voluntarily because they want to set a goal, because they want to care about this stuff, because they want to brag about being carbon neutral, because they, whatever. Most companies are doing this voluntarily. The way you try to focus on finding higher quality projects is work with a broker or reseller you trust and really have them bring you a lot of options and explain the project types. But really, there's a growing market of ratings agencies that are going to do that work for you.
Okay.
So B0 is one big one, Calix is another, Solvera is a third. These agencies are trying to build out respectable ratings, grades on these offset projects, so that you know when you're buying something that is a B0 rating of A or a B0 triple B, you can compare one against the other. Now, you may choose to buy a lower rating than a higher rating for a bunch of reasons. Maybe it's cheaper. Maybe you just like the project type. Maybe you're more interested in nature and less interested in cook stoves, or maybe you care more about refrigerant destruction than you care about methane just capture. Like, there's lots of reasons to buy things of different qualities. Not everyone is always going to buy the A plus rating, and that's fine. But if you can begin to think about, like, understand the language of offsets, what is additionality, what is permanence, what is leakage, you can begin to ask questions to your broker and say, like, I want to make sure I'm buying things that are additional. Can you explain to me how this project is additional? And I want to make sure I believe that. If you can begin to do that kind of stuff, then you can begin to make sure that the offsets you're buying are of a high quality. And they'll always change. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be new math and new science. There's always going to be some issue that came out. This is not about perfection and overthinking every bit of this. This is about trying to make progress quickly on a really big global issue, and saying offsets are not the end all be all. They're not like, oh, if we just have enough offset projects, we'll save the world. They are just a tool among many, many, many tools that we need to deploy.
So to now really get back to the question that you asked me, so which camp am I at? I'm personally, I think, in the camp of, if you're a super emitter, you should definitely do everything that you can do today to reduce what you're doing. So maybe use like cleaner fuel, switch to renewable energy and stuff like that. And then you should take care of the environment, as in like protect a piece of forest, on the Red Plus project. Why? Because, well, the emissions that you're doing today, they're only get totally offset by that forest like many, many years from now. And who knows, there are things that can happen to that forest that are outside of, our control, like all of the natural risks or natural hazards. And I think we've seen a whole lot of different projects in our software, because a lot of times we'll just like pick up on a random project. We call it like Orbify review, and we review it. Yeah, we got some not very clean projects. So they were Red Plus, so conservation, and there was definitely some forest loss showing up, because, for example, the project has been ongoing since 2017 or 18, but there was some deforestation showing up in the project area, which was like a lot more than what it was supposed to be, like the small margin that is still allowed. And I think there is still not enough transparency in the whole thing. And I'm not even talking about satellite imagery and all that. It's I think there is lack of standards in a way that the project progress is reported. What's your take on that?
I think it's fair. That's totally correct. Offsets are relatively new. It's about 30 years since the first offset project. That first offset project was a big like timber company in the Northeast in the United States, who was like, we're cutting down all these trees. People are mad. What can we do about it? Well, maybe if we supported a forest in South America and we're like, yeah, we cut down trees, but we also help some trees, people will be happy about that and we'll be allowed to do this. And they were allowed to do this. And that was the beginning of the first offset project. Not like the best thing ever, right? You're still cutting down a lot of trees, but it was just the first effort. I think over the last 30 years with things like Europe came out with, after the Kyoto Protocol, a carbon market scheme, and that showed actually considerable, or a carbon trading scheme, and that showed a lot of reduction efforts. Now California has a law that says you need to be transparent about the offsets you buy. It's called AB 1305. You have to like talk about the credits that you're buying and publish these certificates on your website so that people can question you and make sure you're buying good things. All of this is improving, and there's 1,000 more things that are going to improve. There's this 2-3 years ago, ProPublica came out with their giant article that said all these Vera offsets are troubling, and Red Plus has its problems, and Vera came out with a retort and said, here's what we're doing about it. Like, it is growing, it is improving. There's nature-based offsets, there's incredible technology-based offsets, which I think are actually very often a little easier to understand, right? If it's a nature-based offset and you're saying, there's this forest, I'm going to protect this forest, it makes sense, but like you said, what if the forest burns down, or what if you protect this forest but another forest gets cut? Like, it's a weird, it's got questions. But if you take, like, there's this cool offset company called Tradewater, and one of their projects is there's all these oil and gas wells around the United States that are uncapped. Like, someone drills for oil, couldn't find any, and they moved on. And there's no regulation that forces you to cap that. And so methane is just slowly leaking out of that well forever. Okay. And we'll keep doing that. So what Tradewater says is, can I get some money from companies and I will go plug that well myself? And that's it. It'll cap it. That's an offset that makes a lot of sense to me, right? There's no regulation that makes you do that. There's an actual problem that's going on. It's additional. Like, I'm going to give you money to go do this, and if I don't give you money, you're not going to go do this. And it's permanent because if it's capped, it's capped. And there's no leakage because, like, this one was capped. It's not saying anything about any others. So we're not going to open another one. Exactly. We're not going to open another well just because we capped this one. Those are two separate issues. So offsets have 1,000 problems. I will always admit that. I also think there's some incredible projects out there that the only way they can have any sort of economic viability is through carbon offsets. No one's going to pay, or regulation. But then when your regulation happens, it's just different. So you can take any angle you want on it. There's carbon offset absolutists who say it's all garbage. There's carbon offset purists who say the only good offset is a removal, and so we need to scale up direct air capture. There's carbon offset people who do only nature or who refuse to do nature. All of those are fair arguments. I appreciate them all.
Only afforestation matters because you need to like replant the forest that's already cut down.
Sure, fine. Yes to everything. Do your best. If something comes out to be incorrect, let's talk about that. Let's figure out how to improve it or whether we should avoid it. But like, people who are carbon offset, I don't know what the right phrase is, denialists, or do they think it's a huge waste of money or time, or they think it's just absolving people of our sins and we're going to buy offsets and move on. Those are the people I disagree with, because those are the, like, in your example, actually, super high emitters. All right, let's say you're a giant transportation company and you have a 10,000 trucks, and you have 10,000 trucks. You're like, all right, I want to do sustainability. You could buy offsets today, or you can begin to build out a strategy that will electrify all your vehicles. That's going to take 10 or 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
The answer is yes. You should do both, because 10 or 15 years of decarbonization is a really important thing to start today, but you can't just buy 1,000 electric trucks.
Right.
Like, you need to build out infrastructure. They're not good enough. They're too expensive. You can't have a business model that does that. Like, you need to invest in. You got to find good partners. You got to find new mechanics. You got to find new warehousing. Like, all those things take 10 or 15 years. Offsets take a minute, because there's a lot of great projects out there that need your money. And as you begin to electrify your fleet, you'll need to buy fewer and fewer and fewer offsets, and your CFO is going to be very happy about both of those things.
So a good strategy then is making sure you're doing something impactful today, but also having a long-term strategy.
That's right. You got to think long-term about these things. Nothing changes overnight. All of this takes a lot of time, but there's always low-hanging fruit. Offsets are one example of a low-hanging fruit. They're not the only one. You can switch to renewable energy credits. You can build out an employee commute policy. You can like create composting and recycling in your office, which takes like a month. Like, you can do a bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. Offsets are one example of many that probably get a lot of attention, because sometimes they seem like a silly, they seem almost too good to be true. That's not the claim. They're just a thing, one of many things.
Do you think there is maybe like lack of education when it comes to that? Because I feel like when we talk with specific companies who are more like on the buyer side, they seem to be just like stuck on a couple of examples. And I'm like, well, guys, have you looked into this? For example, be like, yeah, no, we just heard about this. We're just going to do that. And I'm like, it sounds like you're going shopping with like one thing on your list and you want to disregard everything else.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's because people who are oftentimes in charge of buying offsets, many of them aren't even sustainability professionals.
Right.
Like a lot of companies who are putting people in charge of sustainability, they're putting their investor relations person or their legal counsel or just like some employee from the real estate division who cares about climate. Like these are super smart, super accomplished people with full-time jobs in one area, and then
Mhm.
they're asked to tack on another field of sustainability. And that is really difficult to do because now there's degrees in sustainability and professionals who have been doing this for
Mhm.
decades. And the biggest companies in the world have that. If you're Amazon, you probably have 30 people who do sustainability for you full time. All of them have degrees in it and understand everything from emissions accounting to packaging to regulation to offsets. But if you're like a mid-market company and you're gonna go spend, $200,000 or $500,000 on offsets, and you just like put your finance person in charge of that, yeah, they're gonna like read an article. If the article's good, they're gonna go do it. If the article's bad, they're not gonna do it, and that's it. And so it's not their fault. You could also defend the fact that like if you're a mid-market company, are you ready to hire someone full time to do sustainability? Some people are, some people aren't. Like hiring someone full time at $200,000 a year or whatever, who has a master's degree from Columbia in sustainability, to help out your company of 1,000 people. Some companies, you want to be leaders in this, will do that, and other companies, I think, very justified, are going to say it's just not the right thing for our business at this moment in time. And that's where a place like Greenplaces comes in, or that's where a lot of good consultants come in, or that's where there needs to be more education so that people can do this stuff super, super well, even with fewer and fewer resources.
So, in your experience, when companies turn to you, is it like a long-term partnership, or is it more like, let us get you on track and then you do it in-house?
It's a long-term partnership. So most
Okay.
of our clients are between 500 and 10,000 employees. So they're mid-sized companies, maybe big-ish on the larger side. These are companies who maybe don't have anyone doing sustainability. Maybe they've got one person on an ESG team or a social impact team. And so they don't have it yet. And what our pitch is at Greenplaces is to say, we will be your chief sustainability officer in a box.
Mm-hmm.
We will help you build out your strategy from the very beginning, from the first time you ever need to measure emissions, all the way through figuring out your reduction strategies, your science-based targets, your offset strategy, your renewable energy, like everything that you're going to need to do, we will do for you until you reach a certain size, or you want to be more ambitious about this, or maybe it's getting so complicated that somebody needs to be turned into a full-time employee. But even then, they're going to need a partner because one person doing this for a 10,000 person company is not enough. So
Right.
we try to take the role of like, we're going to run sustainability for you.
Okay. How big is your team?
We're about 45 people probably.
Okay. And I imagine you have all this versatile background, like renewable energy, offsets, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah. So we're a tech company. So we built software that tries to make the carbon accounting process as easy and transparent as possible, helps with audits, helps with reporting. And then as part of that team, we've got, I don't know, a dozen or so sustainability professionals. All of them have degrees in this stuff and who focus on audits or science-based targets or climate risk or any of those categories to try to make this all easy for you.
I want to ask you of a couple of examples of your clients. You don't have to name names, but now I'm
Yeah.
like super curious. Do you have like one example of a company that you're like super proud of? Say they like turned everything around in terms of their operations and stuff. Doesn't have to be like super crazy, right? But just like something that you're like fond of as an example. And then on the other end of the spectrum, the company that like came in and said like, okay, I want to be sustainable, but like we're road blocking you every step of the way?
Oh boy. I will certainly not name names for that second one. Um, well, I'll give you the second one first, and I'll give you the one I'm proud of. The second
Okay,
one is a
okay.
restaurant. The one who's like frustrated to do this. So there was this restaurant, and it's kind of like a fast food chain. I think they have about 100 locations in the United States, and they just had some people who basically want to like comply with a few regulations, and they were just super annoyed about it the whole time. Like, oh, I can't believe we have to do this. What a pain! How frustrating! Whatever. But they have to do it, and so what are you gonna do? They called us, and we started working with them a few years ago, and they really built out an impressive program. Like they've been carbon neutral for a few years. They've reduced waste by like simplifying how much packaging they have, and they've trained their employees on sustainability, so people are able to like teach customers how what's recycling, what's composting, what's
Wow.
landfill. They switched to renewable energy, and they grumbled the whole time, and they kind of still grumble. But like it's a pretty impressive program, and it's been really really cool to see. So that's been really great when like, and that's what I meant at the very beginning of the podcast. When I'm like, I don't really care why you're doing this. I just think as long as you do it well, it's almost
Okay,
like going to the gym. Like I don't care if you're
right.
going to the gym because you love going to the gym, or because you want to look really good for a date, or because your spouse is making you, or because you're bored. I don't know. Go whatever you want to go. But while you're there, you might as well run on the treadmill, do some push-ups, and lift some weights, and then go home sweaty. You all get the same result in the end. So that's an example of a company that like came in a little begrudgingly, and I think has done a really good job since. Um, a company that I'm really proud of and really enjoy working with. So it's a company called Media Ocean, and they're a probably 50-year-old like advertising technology company. I think something like 25% of ads in the United States or in the world runs through Media Ocean at some point. So they like
Okay.
put it in the right place. So big important company.
Hmm.
And they have this sustainability person named Rebecca Hoffler, who's wonderful. And for a few years, she and I have been talking about all her ambitions there. And they have clients asking for this, and their investors really want them to do it, and their executives were interested. Some are more interested than others, but Rebecca really had to build like internal consensus around doing this and doing this well, and
Okay.
she did an incredible job. Over the last couple of years, they joined something called AdNet Zero, which is like the biggest sustainability consortium in advertising. They've started measuring their emissions. They got these big reduction goals. They educate employees at these giant events. They do an amazing job. They're working with clients on this stuff of just like doing it from the bottom up, building employee support, getting the executives engaged for whatever reason they need to be engaged. Some of them are grumpy about it. Some of them are champions of it. Sometimes you have to find the right hero for it. And so Rebecca did a really good job navigating it. There's also examples of companies who like, just care from the beginning, and they care, and they're going to do a good job.
Right.
Asana is a company like that. Lightspeed's like, they're great companies. But I like the Media Ocean example because Rebecca like fought for this and really turned it into a really, really good program.
Wow. That's a really nice example. All right,
Yeah.
I've got another
Hey
tricky
Becky, listen. I'm gonna tell Becky to listen to this. So hey Becky.
question. Please. I'm sure she will be proud of this. Have you ever turned down a prospect or ended a contract with a client because they were just really not making it happen?
Yeah. Um. Definitely. The one example that comes to mind immediately is a product company. That
Like a physical product?
they
Mhm.
sold a thing for your kitchen, and they basically wanted to use offsets in the wrong way. And this is my example. So they're like, we want to be carbon neutral, and we want to do it for marketing. And I said, great. Like, I think that's fine. Whatever reason you want to do this, let's do it. So we measured their emissions, we did all that work. We considered helping them buy offsets. And then they just didn't want to do anything else. Not that they didn't have the time, or the budget, or the value, or whatever. They're just like, we're good. We're done. And so after like a year or two working with them, we basically moved on because, again, I think it's fine if you just want to stop at a certain point and pause and reconsider, or business is up or business is down. You got to refocus on things. But if you're using carbon offsets in the wrong way and you're trying to buy cheaper and cheaper and cheaper offsets just to get away with this claim, I think that's the wrong way of doing this. If they're buying super high quality offsets and really caring about this and thinking about the project, and then saying, oh, like we're just at a tough point in business, we can't invest in improved product right now, but like we will, that's fine. I understand that. But I think what they were doing that I didn't love is to say, what's the lowest possible check we can write to get as much marketing value as possible, period, end of story. And after a year or two of like trying to push them and engage with them and whatever, it was time to part ways.
Yeah, I feel like this is the example that contributes largely to the whole problem of greenwashing.
Yeah, 100%. So in the book, I talk about greenwashing a lot, and talk about how to avoid greenwashing. There's a whole chapter on marketing. And greenwashing is basically getting the green sheen, like the value of being a sustainable company, without do anything that makes you deserve it. And I think there's two pillars that you need to always think about when you're talking about greenwashing, or how to avoid greenwashing: action and transparency, in that order. So first is action. You have to do stuff. Spending money is an example of doing stuff. So buying offsets is an example. But you have to do stuff. You have to measure your emissions. You have to move to renewable energy. You have to improve your products. You have to like build a culture of sustainability. You have to do a bunch of stuff. And you have to be as transparent as possible about what it is you're doing well, what it is you're not yet doing well, and where it is you want to go. And I think if you have a lot of action, but no transparency, nobody can really believe you. Because if you just say we're sustainable without backing that up with transparency, then that's where you get into a lot of trouble. If you have a lot of communication without any action, then that's not the same thing. So if you're super like transparent, but you're not actually doing anything, that's a problem. So for example, Lufthansa got in a lot of trouble a few years ago because they had this like advertisement that was like a plane facing you, and the top was the cockpit of the plane, and the bottom was the globe. And it was like, Lufthansa, the most sustainable airline in the world. And they got sued by the UK Advertising Council because they hadn't done anything. They just thought it would be a cool ad, and it was a cool ad. It looked awesome, but they hadn't done anything. EasyJet had the same problem, but in a different way. So EasyJet actually did something really cool. So EasyJet, in I think 2019, started buying offsets, and they wanted to make carbon neutral flights. And in 2019, that was a big deal. Like, people in sustainability thought that carbon neutrality was the end all be all. If we can all be carbon neutral, that's a great thing. So EasyJet spent millions and millions of dollars being a carbon neutral airline, and they made this commitment to be carbon neutral forever. A few years later, when carbon neutrality just started getting some questions around it, and hey, what kind of offsets are you buying? Are they good? Are they bad? EasyJet got in trouble, and they had action and transparency. They got in trouble, and they're like, hey, you're buying bad offsets. So you know what they did? They took more action. They said, you're right. We are buying bad offsets. We were doing the best with what we knew, but here's how we're going to improve. We're going to take the same amount of money that we were spending before and move all of that into sustainable aviation fuel and things that are relevant to us. And at the moment, we think that's the best we can do. Maybe in 4 years, they get in trouble again and they change something again. But at the moment, that is a really extraordinary thing to do. And so if you take action, you're doing stuff, you're investing in the right categories, you're decarbonizing your products, you're teaching your employees how to do stuff, and then you're transparent about all this. You have your reports, you talk about what's working, you talk about what's not working. One of my favorite examples of this is a giant tech company called Atlassian. They're like a product process management software. They have a great short PDF that they put out every year called "Don't Fuck the Planet." And if you Google that, you'll find it. And it's a very large tech company puts it out, and it's incredible. And what it does a really good job of, it's like a decarbonization. It's a really good name. And so what they do a really good job of in this PDF is it's like a decarbonization guide for tech companies. They said, we at Atlassian are a tech company. We spend a lot of money and a lot of time and have a lot of people who are really good at decarbonizing our business. How can we teach others to do the same thing? And they're very transparent about everything they've done, what worked, what didn't work. They'll say, we had trouble getting executive support So here's everything we tried, and here's what we found at the end. They said, business travel is a place where we're missing all of our goals. Here's where our goals were. It's going in the wrong direction. But here's the chart. Help us. We're not hiding this. Like, if you have ideas on how to do this better, please give us those ideas. And they're very transparent about it all. And they talk about all the actions that they're taking. And they're very transparent about what they're doing about it. And that's why they're one of the leaders in sustainability.
Oh, that's a really cool example. I feel like there is not a lot of that out there.
There needs to be more.
Yeah, exactly. So now a question for, well, not for, but that would definitely come from carbon credit developers, which is like a large base of our community. How do you get your project rated by the rating agencies? Especially if you're like, a wannabe developer, not like a very established one, but like somebody who's starting out. And this, by the way, is also like a large part of our community.
Yeah, I mean, they're businesses like V0 and Calix and Silver. They're just businesses. So you call them up and you meet some sleazy sales guy like me, and they'll sell you the price of their ratings agency. And so
So you
there's
have to
value to
pay
doing it.
to get your project rated.
You have to pay to get your project rated, and there's value to that. It's basically going to be like if V0 says you're an A project, then you can sell yourself for higher. And there's also reasons you wouldn't get yourself rated. So there's a cost to it. And if you already believe that you're a very good project and you're transparent about your processes and maybe you have some other certifications or you've just been around for a while and you have enough customers, maybe you don't want to pay for a rating because it's expensive and you want to sell your credits at a slightly cheaper price. So it's up to you whether it's worth it or not. I think newer project developers, it probably is worth it because getting a stamp of approval from a ratings agency is just how people believe that you're good when they're not going to read past the headline. And there's others who are going to say, yeah, like I know I'm a good project. I've got buyers. I've got a good network. It's not something I need. So fully up to you about whether you should do it. There's a pro and a con to each, but ratings agencies just help standardize the conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think it matters what registry your project is on?
Maybe for super sophisticated buyers, but probably not. If it's like one of the big credible, ACR, Gold Stand, like these are big
Right.
registries. They're all going to make mistakes, I'm sure, and they're all going to be good at other stuff. I'm sure of that as well. I have a friend who is building out a new one because he says for carbon removal, there's not a really good registry. And so, you could find things like Icarus, which is this new one who's trying to find their path. So it's an evolving market. There's startups, there's the old businesses. I don't think it matters unless you're like maybe the people at Google who spend many millions of dollars a year on offsets know things that I don't. But mostly we just look at the project quality, the rating, the project type, and make recommendations off of that to our clients.
Okay. Do you think like true sustainability is just about like reducing your emissions, or should companies be involved in other activities that do not directly impact their operations, or rather do not directly impact the impact of their operations, and just like involved with something else?
Like what? What's an example?
Like say maybe working with some, local communities that need funding and stuff like that.
Yeah, great example. So the last chapter of my book is about policy, and it's called Power Wielding. And the phrase comes from this guy, Auden Schendler, who's the chief sustainability officer for the Aspen Skiing Company. They run all the big mountains in Colorado. And the chapter basically says, everything we talked about in this book does not matter for sustainability. You have to do it, but it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is policy. And the reason for that is because let's say I'm a large tech company and I've got 5,000 employees and I've got 30 offices around the world and I fly to conferences all the time and all that. I can reduce my emissions and let's say my footprint is big. It's a 20,000 metric ton footprint, 30, whatever, big. I can reduce that as much as possible. And it doesn't matter that much for global climate change. It matters. You should do it. It absolutely matters. Like It's worth it. It's your footprint. You should take responsibility of your own stuff. But that's like me as an individual saying, I'm going to become a vegetarian to save the cows. It matters. I should do it. If that's what I believe in, I should do that. But it's not actually going to save the cows.
Mhm.
The only thing that really will save the cows or save the planet or whatever is policy. You need governments, local, state, federal, global compacts, to change how systems work. And the way a company can influence that is either through direct lobbying. Atlassian does this. They go to Sacramento, the capital of California, every quarter or something like that, and lobby with different state senators for regulations that they think are impactful, or through organizations. So Auden Schendler at the Aspen Skiing Company supports what's called POW, Protect Our Winners. Protect Our Winners is a nonprofit that focuses on lobbying for better climate legislation in states where mountains and skiing are a big deal. And that's an amazing thing to do. That's at a high level. Other companies can support the building out of a bike lane in their town, which needs money and local support. Other companies can support like the SEC's legislation to require emissions disclosures, which means that they're sending people to Washington, D.C. to lobby with senators and with White House officials and with the EPA and with different state attorneys general. Like, however you are lobbying, recognize that lobbying and pushing for policy change is the biggest impact we can make generally for the climate. And while your own emissions matter, they are, if not a distraction, then at the very least like a drop in the pond. And our goal is not to add drops to the pond, our goal is not to take one drop at a time out of the pond. It is to build out a sewer system that's going to drain the pond.
Right.
So we need policy to make that happen.
Does your company participate in anything policy related, lobbying and all that?
We try to. So we're based in North Carolina, and when North Carolina legislation comes up that matters, we'll talk about it and we'll tell employees how they can participate in it. We're a smaller company. We're 40 people. So like
Right.
we're beginning to build some of that stuff out, but it's very, very important.
As individuals, what can we do to influence that? Is there anything we can do to
influence?
Sorry?
Yeah, call your senator. Call your senator. Call your representative. Whatever country you're in, whatever state you're in, call whoever it is represents you in your federal government and say you care about a certain law. I live in New York. New York is about to pass a climate law. And so I found this organization that like helps you write a form email. And so I sent form emails to both my state senators and a representative to say, I believe in this law. I want you to vote for it. And they won't read my email, but one of their staffers is going to put up a summary that says, we received 40,000 emails just like this. Your people want you to vote for this law, and if you don't, you will lose office. That's how you make a difference as an individual.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people just never take action, just like, your example with the cow. Just because you think you're not eating meat is going to save all the cows in the world.
Start. You should do whatever you can do. I've got a little composter in my house. I live in a city which has lower carbon, whatever. I also make 1,000 things that are bad for the planet. I do eat meat. I do fly on planes. I do like buying new t-shirts when I want a new t-shirt. I don't know. I'm not a perfect individual, but the goal here is changing policy. The way the book ends, I have this like epilogue that basically says, I don't know if it's possible to live in a system that is both a capitalist system and a sustainable one. I don't know. I don't know if it's possible for me to want to fly to see cool cities, want to go to a steakhouse because I love the taste of meat, want to get new clothes that's awesome and expensive, and also I want to have kids and want to like show them cool things, and also live in a world that is not rapidly heating and where the climate is not rapidly changing. I don't know, but I do know that we need to try to get there. Because I know capitalism is not going away. I know money is going to trump everything. I know humans are short-term beings. And as much as college students might say down with the man and down with the system and down with the banks, Once they get a job that pays them really well, they're going to think really differently, and money is going to trump everything. So the goal is not to say, how do we tear down this system and all live as farmers on our own plot of land? The goal is to say, is it possible to build a system? Or if we were to build a system, how would we begin to build it in a way that makes our planet cleaner, more renewable, and more sustainable? And we'll see if we can get there. I can make very good arguments that we cannot. But I'm also absolutely confident that unless we try, unless we have the mindset that these small improvements are going to make progress, unless we both take ownership of our own lives, as well as push policy and push our companies to do improve things, we're certainly not going to be a better place than we are now. And that's the goal. Let's try to marry a good, successful capitalist economy that brings education and healthcare and interesting lives to billions of people around the world with a system that is sustainable and better for the planet.
So, if there are countries that can, obviously get on this agenda, what about the others that would just never do it? Especially like, again, the super emitters like China, India, and other countries that are just really not buying into it for now.
There's some way. I'm not a geopolitical expert. I know there's like in China, at least they've made a claim that they're going to stop building coal mines after a certain year, which is a big deal to make that claim. They
Right.
made like, it's a big deal. Sure, can't believe they're doing it at all, or they got away. Fine. But it's a dictatorship, and they made a claim, and that's a very big deal. There's also 1,000 problems. The United States is the highest polluter per capita, so we need to look at that before we even look at India and China. Once we look at ourselves and say, look, we're doing all the right things, which we're starting to, but a lot of it depends on the next 4 years as well. Like we have the IRA, we have the SEC law, California, like we're starting to get there, but we'll see if we have the political will to keep it going. Then we use that as influence to put out trade deals to push China and India to do what we want. And we can do that very easily. China, for example, actually is doing some amazing things. They got the biggest electric vehicle companies is BYD in China. BYD sells more electric vehicles, I think, in the United States than Tesla does. Like, they have incredible things happening. Like, they're very big in building batteries. Many big battery plants are in China, and many of the mines where the metals and the minerals for batteries come from are owned by Chinese companies in Africa. So they also do 1,000 things that are terrible. I'm not defending the Chinese, and I don't know enough to make one argument here or there. But I do know you've got to start with yourself. We as America, or you as France or the European Union, need to take leadership positions, and then use that credibility to influence our biggest trading partners and go from there. There's always going to be a holdout. Then you're going to say, oh, what about this developing country that's just beginning to come up? What, they can't use coal? America built itself on coal, but now they can't use coal, and so they're screwed to poverty forever? Okay, fair. Let's figure out how to solve that. But we all need to start somewhere, and let's try to start with a little vision, a little optimism.
Oh, I like that. Start somewhere. Just like start. Just do something.
Just start. You gotta start.
Just do it. Adriel, I think it's been a super insightful episode. Thank you so much for coming. And I hope we'll be able to do a follow-up episode with you, because I have like a gazillion other questions, but of course we cannot package everything to one episode. One question: where can we get your book? Amazon? Any other outlets?
Yeah, wherever you want. It's in most local bookstores. It's in wherever you feel like buying a book. You can just type in Attainable Sustainability, Building Your Corporate Climate Strategy. It's $15. I think you'll like it. I try to make it funny and interesting, as well as like actually tangible. And you can also, LinkedIn is my only social media. So you can find me on LinkedIn, just Adriel Lubarsky, pretty much everywhere.
And what about your company? How do you find your company?
Greenplaces, spelled very normally, greenplaces.com. If you are trying to build your corporate sustainability strategy, or you just have questions or want to figure out how to do it, give us a call or send me an email.
Thank you so much. Do you have any like final blessings for the listeners?
Start somewhere.
All right, that's a good one. Thank you so much, and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you, Aya.